I've been here a couple of times before to talk about the policy with respect to the permitting of trees that ended up in having the family of last name Bonds having their house destroyed. And so someone here was nice enough to put Julie Fukuda in touch with me. And I had a very interesting and conversation with her, but she couldn't discuss that event because the city's in litigation. So the city's being sued, my assumption is, because of this policy. So I would suggest, and I think that's your charter function, is to provide, or one part of your charter function is to provide policy recommendations to city council, that you recommend that Title 11 be amended in such a way that this does not happen again. Or something even worse happens, which is somebody dies because a tree is denied. You deny the permit to remove the tree and it crushes the house and kills somebody inside of it.
Can I, just a clarification, so what are you recommending specifically?
Here's what I recommend specifically. I would recommend that you offer this amendment to whatever part of Title 11. Said any resident will not be denied a permit to remove a tree that if it fell could strike their residence and therefore damage their property and pose a threat to their safety. The resident shall replace the removed tree with one that is a minimum of 6 feet in height, no more than 20 yards from the site of the original tree.
Any other questions, commissioners? It looks like Commissioner Clapp's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to just check in on that. So you're suggesting that if someone asks to remove a tree, we give an answer that if we suggest that the city gives the answer that is yes, no matter what, if they
Correct.
think that tree may fall on their house.
Correct.
So should that be the same for any other rule that we have? And do you have any idea what the implications of the amount of tree removal that would have in the city as looked at from the services that we get? That's the whole reason that Title 11 is put into place. It was not something that we forced on everybody as the UFC or the city. It was a very long process where people said, we want to retain our trees. So I appreciate you offering this as an amendment or as something that we could give to the city, but it would essentially just make Title 11 a completely pointless venture to begin with. And I just don't see that that's something that's really a good compromise at the minimum, but also it doesn't solve any of the other issues that we are dealing with in terms of a climate crisis, living in a city that's consistently getting hotter and hotter. So I just want to kind of ask if there's something that we could talk about that's a little more constructive, because that is a 180-degree turn from what the city does right now. And I don't think that that is really feasible.
So what's your question?
My question is there something that is less extreme that you'd like to provide so that we can have a better conversation? Right now, you're saying if I want to cut down a tree, then I can cut down a tree. That's essentially what that amendment you just provided, or the recommendation you provided, says. If I'm a homeowner and I would like to cut down this tree, the city shall not say no.
If it can strike your house.
If it can strike your house. So any tree within striking distance of your house, no matter how safe it is, no matter how stable it is, if you determine it, you as a non-professional who may not know anything about trees, but you just don't want those trees there. So what about your neighbor's house? Could you cut down your neighbor's house because it's within striking distance of your tree?
You have no way of knowing how stable or safe a tree is.
That is just not true.
It is absolutely true. You have absolutely no way of evaluating the strength of a root ball. You have absolutely no way of evaluating how much force is on the tree.
I just want to heads up, guys. We're actually out of time for this. The idea is not to solve this at this moment, because it's obviously a very complex issue. But I want to thank you very much for coming. And
if you think you've got something more important on your agenda than this, why don't you let me know what it is? This is going to happen again. Someone's going to die. You
Yep.
can't take responsibility for these decisions that you're making. You tell somebody they have to have a tree next to their house, that they want to have it removed, and then it falls and it kills somebody, and what are you gonna have to say about it?
So it is an important issue. I think it would be wrong for me to say that probably most of the commissioners and everyone else thinks it's important for us to think this through, but we're not gonna solve it here in this agenda. But it would be nice if anything you have specifically to send us in writing, that would be great. Yeah, and if commissioners feel we need to have this as an agenda item for more discussion together, then we'll do it. But thank you so much for coming. So we're gonna move on to meeting minutes. Okay, any motion to approve the minutes or amend them in any way?
I'm gonna say one last thing before I leave here. I'm taking all these recordings and I'm gonna forward them to the woman who wrote the original article in Willamette Week. And you guys are gonna look really good. That's gonna be a great piece of journalism.
Okay, folks, any amendments to them?
Let's see, I sent some suggested amendments to Brian, so I assume they've been forwarded, some edits, and that sort of stuff, so. I think most of them were not. They were just grammar and that sort of stuff. I assume you got them,
Yeah, I got your edits and
so.
I think I've implemented most of them and they're, yeah, they should be live on the server. So I think Brian will probably send out a revised copy at some point, I think.
Okay.
So it was an interesting. So I got confused at the meeting. The reporting of the budget process for the city, and I think that's my inadequate understanding. So as I understand it now, what happens is the mayor presents a budget, the city council approves that, and then a short time thereafter, then they come back with amendments to the mayor's budget. And then, which they can do, and then that's the functional budget that some other city group works with, I guess. Is that correct? I mean, I assume an approved budget would include the amendments, but apparently that's not the way the city does it initially. When Mayor Wheeler presented his budget later on, I believe Ryan and Gonzalez had some amendments and I think they were accepted, but that happened at a later date. But I guess technically it's
Okay.
considered that the budget was approved prior to those amendments. Is that right? Is that?
I think the confusion is the mayor presents a budget
Yeah,
to council.
Yeah.
Then council has the opportunity to review and deliberate.
Yeah.
Sometimes council members recommend changes to that budget. And then there's a whole nother vote on whether that budget is adopted as amended or as originally submitted. So the budget that was adopted, this is a spoiler alert on my report, week before last, or was it last week at city council, may have included amendments. However, what council voted on is the budget that will be implemented starting July 1st, what they voted to adopt.
okay.
Does that make sense? So any amendments would come before it's adopted by council.
Well, so what I was, in the minutes, it's saying approved. The mayor's budget was approved on May 15th, and Brian says that is accurate. I thought that since the amendments came after that, and that is what they approved, that's when the budget would be. So I think
Yeah.
it's just wording, but
It is approved, adopted.
okay,
Approved doesn't mean council has adopted it. yet.
okay, all right, that helps, thank
That
you,
adoption came after our last.
okay.
Okay, with the changes, recommended changes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Okay, second?
I can
Spruce?
second.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. So, yeah, we're gonna move on, to report that thankfully Leah Black has agreed to be UFC co-chair. And so our plan is to probably switch off, chairing the meetings and, taking the lead on different things as it makes sense. And so we're hoping to get your approval of that. Any comments, questions? We have a motion to approve.
Question, is this a 2-year, 4-year for the duration of their current term? What's the duration?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that.
This is a good question.
Yeah,
Until circumstances change. I don't know.
Yeah, it has been in the past, typically until that person's decides to do something else, or until the end of their term. However, I believe the commission can vote to appoint chairs when it would like.
Okay.
So it could change along the way. I would need to check the bylaws for
I
that.
think it says annual approval, but
Okay, then you might know more than I.
okay, Commissioner Bechtold.
I would recommend just to have a clean motion that we either establish with some sort of time period. So either the remainder of Commissioner Plack's current term or for 1 year with renewal.
Is that a motion?
Sure, but I think we have to pick which one, because I don't know what Commissioner Plack's current term is, so.
What do you recommend?
I think it's up to Commissioner Plack.
I'm just trying to remember when my current term ends because I actually don't have the date in my head. So
Then I would recommend maybe a year, because then if it ends early, well, if your term was, did our terms just begin? Are we on a July cycle?
You have different terms
We
with
have different
intention. They're
terms.
staggered.
Yeah, so it's conceivable that, or I would say it's hard to say because you don't know. Like, if you say a year and her term ends prior to a year, then you have some procedural funkiness.
The bylaws do, when we have had vacancies in the past, Commissioner Bechtold, the commission has filled them when there hasn't been a chair. So that can happen
Okay.
at any time. It's not limited by what a sitting chair has said they would serve.
April of 2021.
Commissioner Vandermark?
Well, I was just waiting for confirmation so I could make the motion.
Okay.
I think we should do a year. I think that's a safe bet.
Okay, I will make the motion to name Commissioner Plack as one of our co-chairs for a year with the opportunity to renew.
Okay, any second?
Commissioner Bechtold seconds.
Okay, great. All in favor? And Commissioner Meisner's back. Thank you. Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? Thanks. Great.
Thank you for your service, Commissioner Plack.
thank you. I'm looking
Thank you.
forward to it.
And I will note that weren't folks knocking down, beating down the doors to do this, so let's keep that in mind, commissioners. Okay, City Foresters report.
Thank you. Commissioner Feldstein. First up, I think I can't do this enough. I want to sincerely appreciate all of you commissioners for your service to the city, to Portlanders and trees. And since we now have a new co-chair, thank you very much, Commissioner Plack, for taking on that new role. That leads to my next item. Commissioner Ivory Iheanacho has stepped down from the commission. She sent you all an email just within the past 2 weeks about her resignation. I want to express my appreciation for Ivory's nearly 2 years of service and the positive impact she's had on the city and trees and for Portlanders. I'm sure you're interested in knowing how we will fill the vacancy that her departure leaves. So as you may remember, there's already recruitment underway for another vacant seat. So there are now 2 for the Forestry Commission, and applications are currently being received. You've received information about that in the past as well. We'll be seeking to use this process to fill both of those seats if possible. And that posting for receiving applications doesn't expire until August. And if there's need, that can be extended as well. So please share that opportunity broadly so that we get a good applicant pool. My next item, as you may have seen in city communications and the media recently, on July 1st, all of the city bureaus will begin reporting to the mayor as the executive authority. And an interim city administrator, Michael Jordan, will oversee bureau operations for the city. You may recall that one of the authorities of the mayor on city council is to assign bureaus to different council commissioners in the current form of government. Obviously, this will change in the new form of government. And this step, moving all the bureaus to the mayor for executive and to interim city administrator Michael Jordan as the operations lead, is a midway step, a transitional step towards the new form of government. That structure is expected to be in place until at least January 1st, when the newly elected officials will take their roles and make decisions according to their authorities under the new form of government. My next item, another July 1st event. That's the first day for the new city entity called Portland Permitting and Development to begin. That organization, PP&D, subsumes what's currently the Bureau of Development Services, and also is going to be responsible for all private property and associated public works permitting functions of all the infrastructure bureaus. You have had briefings on this in the past. Some of the folks from PP&D came and spoke with you about what's going on. That means that Portland Water Bureau, Bureau of Environmental Services, Bureau of Transportation, and Portland Parks and Recreation Urban Forestry's staff and responsibilities related to private property development, code responsibilities, and the associated public works permitting all moves to PP&D starting July 1st. Urban Forestry has 7 positions with 5 staff in them moving over to PP&D starting July 1st. There are 2 vacancies. There were 3 vacancies. We just recently hired on behalf of PP&D a new tree inspector. Actually, they start today. So they are hired directly into PP&D. And we're committed to assisting PP&D with other recruitment and hiring and training of all the tree related staff and supporting and instilling tree code implementation as much as possible during the transition. Our focus is on doing what we can to ensure correct tree outcomes according to the tree code, as well as current standards, including arboricultural and urban forest best management practices. And this will be double duty for several of our team, because they'll be continuing to do the work they have been doing, as well as trying to support and teach PP&D folks how to apply the code. However, we know the tree regulations and development situations are important to preventing future canopy loss, increasing future canopy, and having both housing and trees in the city. So this may be a topic that the commission would like to be updated on at some point in the future by Portland Permitting and Development. My next item, just a reminder that the public hearing on the large, what we're calling the large tree amendment, that is Portland City Code 11.05.040. That will be on July 23rd in the evening. It starts at 5 p.m. It's a joint hearing of you all, the Forestry Commission, with the Planning Commission. And you have information about this in your email. It's a significant amendment significant amendments to Title 11 require public hearings of both bodies, the Forestry Commission and the Planning Commission. So this is in fulfillment of that requirement. And those public hearings are an opportunity for Portlanders to weigh in on what they think should happen with that particular code provision. Our next commission meeting will have information about that part of the code, its outcomes to date as it has been implemented, and staff's recommendations to council thus far. My next item is back to the budget. So last week, City Council adopted the fiscal year 24-25 budget. That begins on July 1st also. July 1st is a big day. It includes initial funding for the PSEF Tree Protection and Care Initiative, which you've heard about before also. That's the $65 million over 5 years for the first phase of new tree services and support. Those new services include, among other things, developing and implementing Portland's first street tree maintenance program by the city, reducing or eliminating certain tree permit fees in non-development situations, adding communication and education functions about the urban forest and regulations and trees, and also assistance in caring for trees on private property. Those are things that we have heard from you all on in the past, as well as many other folks in the city, including through our Portland Urban Forest Plan Update Project, which has been seeking to get broad input from the city. So we know those are areas of high interest and need, and we're really excited that we have some funding to begin working on those. Again, tree protection care was originally requested to be $125 million over 5 years. So this is the first phase, and during this phase, we'll be building and learning as we go. We'll be able to evaluate funding needs for future phases and request more funds as appropriate as we identify need in future fiscal cycles. The adopted budget, council's adopted budget, also removes $35 million over 5 years in general fund from urban forestry's budget, which is almost all of our general fund. That's for existing programs and services, so nothing new. And it is being replaced with the same amount in Portland Clean Energy funds. We're working with the city and Vibrant Communities financial teams to align the new funding, the PSEF funding, with the appropriate existing programs and services within urban forestry, and developing new expenditures, accounting, tracking, and reporting. It's unclear yet what reporting will be expected, but we certainly expect to be able to account for how the funds are spent and that they're spent appropriately. PSEF funding is for different purposes than general fund. So this is important work and will take some time. Almost done. Next one. So a big announcement, especially for a lot of city staff. We now have a city approved contract for software for urban forest management. Our vendor is Planet Geo. That's Plant It, written as one word, Geo. This is the first time the city has had tree asset management and workflow software. And this will replace our currently still partly paper-based system of documentation and workflow. It's a really great time to be getting this, if not years earlier, because it's really critical to efficient and accurate street tree maintenance, equitable tree canopy programs, and park tree maintenance, among other things. I'll put, after I'm done, a link to that company in the chat if you want to look at the software that they have. And my last item, Connecting Canopies, which is a program run through a number of local community groups, headed up by the Nature Conservancy, has a diversity and green jobs program. I think many of you have heard of this before. It's been mentioned in meetings before. Urban Forestry participates in that green jobs program, as do several other community organizations in the city. And we have 2 green jobs community canopies graduates now on urban forestry staff. They are community service aides working on street tree inventory. And one of them pointed that out to me, which I thought was just great. So it's like a little sign of success there.
Nice.
Yeah. And I'll take any questions you have.
Commissioner Nelson.
What percentage of urban forestry's budget for 24-25 is going to be coming from general funds?
For the coming fiscal year, none or close to none.
None.
So it's about $7 million each year that we receive in general fund currently. And that's 35 million over 5 years. So almost all of that will be leaving us.
So that means that PSEF money is being paid, is being used for your salary, Blake's salary, Brian's salary, Belinda's salary. All general funds are being taken away from urban forestry, and you're now totally reliant on PSEF. Is that correct? Because your development funds are also going away to this new bureau, the permitting bureau.
Right, that's true. Private property development funds, so
Private
permit revenue
Okay.
is going over there. Urban forestry has a few funding sources, so there's parks levy as well.
Okay, that's
And also we have our 2 Title 11 established trust funds that are used very actively, especially the larger the 2 tree planting and preservation fund. We use that for most of our tree planting programs.
so between those 2, that's maybe 10 million, guessing
And permit revenue from non-development
from
permitting
Yeah.
and enforcement and violation. So most of the tree code implementation remains with urban forestry, and there is some revenue through that. That will be less if things go as planned with tree protection care, because we want to remove some of those barriers. However, I think your real question, Bruce, is, what's that alignment? What is the PSEF funding going to pay for? What can it pay for?
Yeah.
That's what my report was about. That is yet to be determined. And we're really looking to the city budget office and Vibrant Communities financial team. Since that decision was made already, they'll be setting that up so that the funds are used appropriately.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, I have 2 questions. I might lead with the second one because it aligns with what you were just talking about, Jen. Do you think that there's any shifts that will have to happen to that kind of $35 million and what it was being able to do because of general funds and because of the PSEF funding? Like, I know you're saying you're all working it out, but do you sense there might be implications to work having to shift because of the different primary funding source?
Yeah, great question. I have no sense of our functions and services changing because of the funding change. I think the intention and the goal by all involved, including city council, is for our existing services to continue and not be negatively impacted or changed by the funding change.
You had a second question?
Yeah, and the second one was about just so I technically understand the folks that are under the new PP&D. Are the folks, when you say like the urban forestry staff that are moving, will they technically become PP&D employees at that point? Is that like the kind of entity they'll operate under?
Yes, they will no
Okay.
longer be part of urban forestry. So example, Emil Jakubovic is currently a tree inspector of at least a few years with us, perhaps several. He works in private property development permitting and the associated public works, so right-of-way permits generally. As of July 1st, he will no longer be in Parks Urban Forestry, he'll be in PP&D.
Okay,
It's a really big move that council directed in short order.
yeah,
And so our expectation and what we understand from the folks in charge of developing PP&D is that we'll be working very closely together for a long time to come. We need to teach them the processes that are in place, also our standards and specifications, which they should still be fulfilling. And there are those vacancies that we hope to fill as well. There are vacancies in other bureaus, teams moving over to PP&D as well. And at present, PP&D doesn't have its own director, so to speak. There's a BDS interim director, David Kuhnhausen, who will step into that role July 1st. But my point is there's a lot that's yet to be organized and arranged. There's a lot going on right now inside the city with identifying the processes and roles and documenting those in what we call interagency agreements. We've been working a lot on those.
okay. Yeah, no, you got at my maybe sub questions, Jen, so thank you for that. And I realize that there might be some drawbacks to this, but also some potential opportunities. Hopefully, that's how I like to lead with silver linings, like to see maybe infuse more urban forestry training and insights within a permitting entity. So I'm going to try to lead with that optimism.
Great. I am with you, Commissioner Vandermark. The way I've explained it to people is the goal of PP&D is to have more effective and quicker permitting timeframes, which are great goals. And through this new organization that's being built from the ground up, including with our support, we can hope that we will get even better code outcomes in terms of trees from this organization.
I have a quick follow-up question to what Megan was asking. So the staff are moving over and the funding for the staff. What about the revenue? Because in the past, it wasn't the excess right of the cost and so could be reinvested in tree issues, or am I incorrect on that?
The revenue from, I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
The revenue earned through permitting fees in private property development situations and the associated public works permitting is used to pay for those services. So they pay for the staff involved as well as other things, software, computers,
Right.
what have you. And you may recall that each spring, the infrastructure bureaus go through a fee schedule update process. This was on our agenda a little while ago. We didn't spend much time on it at the commission because we didn't have any changes. But the primary reason for those fees to change is to adjust to absorb costs changing.
Okay. So there was no excess revenue to speak of, so it's not a loss.
That's right.
For investment in trees. Okay,
That's right.
good to know. Okay, we're largely out of time, but any other burning questions on the report? Great, thanks so much. Now we're moving over to our exciting new program, the Urban Forest Plan. And we have nearly an hour and a half to spend on that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion.
All right. All right, so good morning, commissioners. As a reminder, I'm Belinda Udelman, Planning and Policy Analyst with Urban Forestry and Parks and Recreation, and the project manager for the Portland Urban Forest Plan. So with the remainder of the meeting this morning, I'm going to present to you, give you an engagement summary. So what we've been doing so far in terms of engaging with the public and staff and what we've heard. And then share our draft vision and goals, which hopefully you all received a copy of in advance. And then we'll have a discussion about those. And then share you what we've been learning and kind of where we're at in the process for setting our new canopy targets, which is something we're doing as part of this project. We'll have a discussion about that. And then I'll tell you our next steps. We have plenty of time for questions about the presentation. So in terms of our first phase of engagement, the goal of this phase one was really to talk to people about What are the most important benefits and services of trees to different communities? What are challenges to preserving, planting, and caring for trees? Where do people want to see trees or more trees? And just generally, what are some of the top values and priorities that Portlanders have for trees in our city? Things that we can keep in mind for our vision, our goals, our recommendations. So I'm going to give you just a brief summary of who we talked to, what we heard, and how we'll use that feedback. And as part of the planning process, we are creating a complete summary of all of our engagement activities and what we heard. So that'll be available later on in the process. It's still working through that. But just to summarize, so we did a variety of engagement events throughout February, March, April, May, to get us to where we are now. So we've been having meetings with our 3 advisory committees, one of which is all of you, and then our community advisory committee and our technical advisory committee. So with those groups, we've been talking about priorities, challenges, what are things we can be doing to improve the way that we preserve, plant, and care for trees moving forward. And also working very closely with our community advisory committee and now with all of you on our vision and goals. We also did a series of community events. So we did an open house. We had about 70+ people of all ages. It was pretty well attended as an opportunity to just share information about the plan, about benefits and services that trees provide, some of the analyses we've been doing, and mostly just give space for community to tell us what's important to them. So in addition to that, we also had a citywide survey. We received about 1,700, so almost 2,000 responses from people all over the city. And that was an opportunity for folks sort of similar to the open house to tell us what are challenges they face, what are their priorities, what kinds of things do they want the city to do in terms of programming, education, services. How can we be better service providers and managers of the urban forest? What does the community want the city to do? Then we also had a series of focus groups. So we did 7 focus groups with our centered communities or historically marginalized communities. 4 of those were in languages other than English. So we had Chinese, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And that was an opportunity to just have a much deeper conversation with groups we don't always hear from and that we may not hear from as much in an open house or survey, to just share information about the city and our urban forest, what we do, and hear what's important, what's on people's minds related to trees in the urban forest. Brian and I also did a series of presentations to other city advisory commissions. So we spoke to the Multnomah Youth Commission, Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Portland Freight Committee, Design Commission, Planning Commission, Historic Landmarks Commission, to make sure that they were all aware that this project is happening, and about the open house and survey, and just give more opportunity to hear from community members. We also did several different discussions with other interest groups. So just groups that we thought, maybe we weren't hearing from during all of the other activities, wanted to make sure we're checking in with folks. And this is something we'll continue to do to supplement more formal engagement activities to make sure we're hearing from a wide range of people. So some examples of the groups that we heard from, we talked to some industrial landowners and interest in Columbia Corridor and Northwest Industrial District, some business groups, also Shade Equity Coalition. Recently had a discussion with some staff from Friends of Trees and Trees for Life of Oregon, Johnson Creek Watershed Council with some of the elders, and we'll soon be talking to, spending more time talking to the business community and local tree care providers. And then last, just as a reminder, this is a community engagement, but we did also host a series of discussions with city staff. Talked to over 80 staff in 8 different bureaus to go into more depth than what we have time for in our technical advisory committee meetings to hear about challenges and priorities among staff. So what did we hear from all of that? This is just going to be a brief summary again, because more information will be available soon. But kind of across everything that we did, we heard over and over that the community wants more assistance and support for tree planting, maintenance, and removal. I'll get into a little more detail about that in a minute. But generally speaking, we heard people want trees, but they need more support in caring for them. Also, equitable distribution of tree canopy, shade equity, that's something that's top of mind for many folks we spoke to, wanting to make sure that everyone has access to trees and shade in their neighborhoods. Also a strong desire for community education, outreach, and training opportunities. So workforce development programs, more information for the publics, so people know how to be better stewards of their trees. You know, what species should we be planting? How much should we be watering in the summer? Those kinds of things. And then also a lot about community partnerships and the need for trust building between the city and community. So a desire for community to be more involved and play a more active role in our forest care. Also heard a lot of concern about tree protection and preservation, specifically for large mature trees. Just wanting to make sure that we are continuing to have policies and improve policies to protect and preserve trees, both in development and non-development situations. So we also asked about the biggest barriers to having trees in the city. I think this is probably not a surprise to most of us, but the cost is a significant barrier, especially thinking more about maintenance and removal and replacement. Trees failing and hazard trees, we heard a lot about this. We did do a lot of our engagement in early spring after the storm, so it was certainly top of mind. We're very concerned. And then also heard a lot of concerns about root damage, both to sidewalks and to people's homes, just wanting to make sure that, you know, there's appropriate guidance out there for planting the right tree in the right place, and how to avoid that, but still have trees in our urban areas. Among some communities also heard about leaf and fruit litter, and that can be a real barrier for folks trying to navigate the sidewalk, or for older folks and their properties not being able to clean it up, and just wanting to see more support from the city on that side of things. And then in our survey, also heard a lot about as a barrier to having more trees, just being a renter and not having as much control over your property, which is something we've heard before. We also asked about where people think it's important to have more trees and to have trees in our urban environment. We heard kind of parks and natural areas and along the street that were top priorities across all activities that we completed. So among community advisory committee, focus group, survey, open house, people really want street trees. They want shade, especially where people are walking or biking or riding transit. And then in our parks and natural areas, also a strong desire to make sure that as we're building more dense housing and more affordable housing, that people living in those communities also have access to trees. Wanting to see trees in yards, shopping areas, schools and campuses, could be college campuses, hospitals, industrial campuses. So we heard overwhelmingly that the city should provide more support to private property owners. And so we asked, what should that support look like? So top is financial support for the removal of dead, dying, or dangerous trees, educational information about tree planting and care, and financial support for tree planting and care. So with all of that information, that was collected during our first phase, now we're moving into phase 2. Which we'll be working on all across summer and into fall. So we're using everything we learned to think about what we want for the future of our urban forest, for our vision, our goals, and our recommendations and actions. And then we'll take all of that information after we've drafted all of that and put it together into the plan itself in that final phase 3. Will be the end of 2024 and early 2025. So with that, I guess I'll pause there if there are any questions about engagement before I go into it.
I had a question. I was just curious. It's really, first of all, great work. Like, it's really great to hear all the different groups you've engaged with, the different ways you've tried to make it easy for folks to, give their feedback and input. I was curious, it sounds like you've seen some broad overall trends. Did you notice any differences between different community groups that were noteworthy about like some of the priorities that they named? Or
Yeah,
barriers?
Good question. I would say across general community groups, actually a lot of similarities. I was a little surprised at how similar people's feelings were across the different groups. When we did see some differences, that was more from specific stakeholders. So thinking like the Portland Fright Committee, industrial landowners, businesses. That's sort of where there's more differences in our industrial areas. Some community groups want to see more trees there, as I think we expect, but there's some concerns on the other side for that. I'm also thinking about like highways are major transportation corridors. There's difference of opinion there across the more industrial business groups compared to what the community wants.
Commissioner Meissner.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Director Kyber.
Belinda, could you remind us what other bureaus have been involved in the project, whether it's on the technical advisory committee or those you've done interviews with?
Yeah. So we are engaging on our technical advisory committee and also through all the interviews and discussions. We have the Bureau of Transportation, Bureau of Environmental Services, Water Bureau, Portland Fire, Bureau of Emergency Management,
Development Services.
not Development Services, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We did have, actually, no, we do have BDS.
Okay.
That's true. Thank you.
I was going to
Sorry.
follow up with you afterwards, like, we really need to talk-
We definitely did.
which will be PPND, Portland Permitting and Development, July 1st. Thank you.
Yeah, and then we also have our state and regional stakeholders as well. So Oregon Department of Forestry, TriMet, and Metro, and Multnomah County.
Sure, Nelson.
No outreach to the neighborhood organizations in this round.
I shared information about the open house and survey with them. And offered to do presentations. I didn't get any takers, so didn't do that. But I have, a list of all the chairs, presidents of those groups that I shared the email to.
Had one just follow-up semi-question thought in response to Leah's comment, and that is, the advisory commission may have an interest in hearing more about some of the qualitative, like rub areas that are big opportunities, but there's differences of opinion. Whereas, I can see that wouldn't be of interest in like a general presentation. So future.
Yeah, okay.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, Belinda, I'd love to hear just thoughts about like I'm thinking about the translation from what folks are sharing to write an updated urban forestry management plan. And like one of the things I'm the most curious about, albeit excited, is right, like there's obviously identification of need for financial support. And I also understand that we need to have the funding to do that. So I'm just curious about like how some of that feedback, like how we might utilize that to inform our urban forestry management plan, but also how we might utilize that to actually try to actualize that need.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very exciting that we're updating this plan now, and we also have a lot going on with the Portland Clean Energy Fund. Since a lot of what people are asking for, we're actually already getting prepared to provide. So that's one step. But then also, I mean, our recommendations and actions in the plan will reflect us thinking about, okay, what are the ways we could actually, I mean, how are we already providing some of that? And then what else can we be doing? Does that answer your question? So we will kind of definitely include information about what programs or services we should be trying to provide that assistance. Want to continue? All right. So we can move on to discussing the vision and goals. So I'll share a little bit about our process for how we're creating them. And then we'll read through them and have a discussion about them. So all of the information that we have heard from phase 1, so through our open house, our survey, our focus groups and discussions, all of that information about benefits of trees that are important to people, top priorities, challenges. We're reading through and revisiting what we heard there, and then working with each of our different advisory committees to talk through how those have been incorporated, to be incorporated into our draft vision and goals. And then having kind of work sessions with staff and with the different advisory committees, so similar to what we're going to do today, to hear specific feedback of, staff heard from community. We put what we think we heard in terms of content into our draft vision and goals, and then really relying on our advisory committees to help us decide whether we got it right and what's missing, what needs to be added. So there's a lot of back and forth. It's an iterative process. At this point, after today, we will really work on the the wordsmithing and getting the exact details right. But up until now, it's really been focused on making sure we're getting the content right. So that'll be a key point of our discussion today. So for the draft vision, I think you all had a copy, but just in case you haven't read them yet, I'm going to read through it. And we'll start with just the vision and talk about that, and then move towards the goals. So we start, I guess one other thing I want to say, we talked a lot with our community advisory committee about what the vision should be. And there was a strong desire for making sure it's something that people can understand, and that we're really clear about what we mean. We're not just using buzzwords, but that it's clear what everyone can expect from us so that we can be held accountable. So because of that, we took a different approach than what's in the current 2004 vision statement, and tried to really break it down into sections so that it's clear what we're talking about and what our values and priorities are. So we have this kind of opening statement, and then it's supported by more detailed value statements. Portland's urban forest is a healthy and resilient ecosystem which serves as a living testament to Portland's commitment to community health and climate action. The urban forest includes the interconnected network of trees, vegetation, and soil in our city. So first, a deeper dive into our values is a healthy, biodiverse, climate resilient urban forest. We manage the urban forest to thrive amidst ongoing and unexpected climate challenges like heat, wildfire, storms, and pests. The city and community have the resources to keep trees healthy and well-maintained throughout their life cycle. The urban forest is made up of a diversity of native and other species, reflecting the diversity of environments within Portland. This range of trees supports healthy and comfortable spaces for people and wildlife in all parts of the city. We preserve and plant native or climate resilient trees. Our policies and practices emphasize the importance of preserving mature trees and achieving canopy, climate, and livability goals. Racial and social equity guide decisions. Our tree canopy is preserved, protected, and expanded equitably across neighborhoods to provide access to nature and improve health for all Portlanders. We take accountability for our history. We learn about the impacts of past and current policies and practices on different communities. We look at who benefits from the urban forest today. We prioritize addressing gaps and unequal burdens experienced by Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, immigrants and refugees, LGBTQ2SIA+ people, people with disabilities, youth, older adults, and people earning low incomes. An urban forest that supports healthy people and ecosystems. Trees are prioritized and managed to maximize benefits to people, wildlife, and the natural environment. They improve public health and well-being by cleaning our air, reducing stress, fostering a sense of place, and encouraging physical activity outdoors. Trees increase our community's resilience to climate change by providing shade and cooling, storing carbon, slowing the flow of stormwater. Trees and vegetation provide a connected network of habitat for birds, insects, fish, and other wildlife. Portland's trees are protected and managed to benefit future generations. Sustainable urban design. The city and community value trees as critical infrastructure. Proactive planning and coordination creates inviting public and private spaces with room for healthy trees. The urban forest is an integral part of Portland's identity and character. City staff and community members work together to design and build spaces that prioritize the preservation and integration of trees. We use trees strategically in our streets, parks, yards, and other spaces to provide shade, habitat, and manage stormwater. We think creatively and use innovative strategies to make space for a diversity of trees across all land uses. Collaborative care and shared responsibility. Portlanders value the urban forest and actively work together to protect and care for it. Care of the urban forest is coordinated across city and regional governments, businesses, community organizations, and residents. We foster collective responsibility for urban forest management, two-way communication, knowledge sharing, and strong partnerships. Resources, education, training, and services for trees and tree care are accessible to all Portlanders. So now I'll open it up for discussion. Here's some questions to help guide that if that's helpful, or you feel free to also just jump in with whatever you'd like to share. But generally, I'd love to hear what you like or dislike about the vision. If you have concerns about the content, knowing that there's still going to be some wordsmithing going on. And if there's anything that you think we need to add or remove, and why.
Could open the box to see the commissioners again. That would be great. Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
Questions, comments, commissioners?
I can just add, excuse me, I could add just a comment that I was there when this was both crafted and where a community group looked at other missions and statements and figured out what they liked about other ones and what Portland might need that's unique. And so I was able to hear a lot of the comments as well as the response to this. And I think the community was really happy overall. They kind of honed in on a couple words and things, but they were really happy with how this statement covered all of their concerns. And it was a really diverse group. And it was just fun to hear them kind of support their favorite parts, and that I don't know, just appreciation for all the work that went in it, because this is putting together a lot of content in a very succinct statement. So kudos to the writing, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate that so far what I have seen was very positive, the feedback.
Great to hear. Anyone else? Commissioner Plack.
Thanks for sharing that, Melinda, because that's really great to hear. I really appreciate all of the mention of climate resilience, and also the acknowledgement of history and intended and unintended consequences of policy and how that all folds in. I think it's great to have that named, because then we have to back it up with action, but we have that laid out here. So those parts really spoke to me, and I really appreciated seeing them as part of it.
Commissioner Vandemark, thank you.
Yeah, I also thank you, Melinda, for sharing that. It's really helpful. And I would say one thing in reading it, I think there's so much I really liked about it. The one thing that maybe, like, Leah, almost to your point, like, that I would potentially want strengthened if it aligns with what folks are saying is the part about climate resiliency. I feel like it's like, I truly feel like we're in a climate crisis. Like, we're not waiting for it. It's coming. It's here. And so to lead with that, or just like to strengthen maybe the potential language around that, is something that kind of I noted. And there was somewhere in it, and I'm trying to remember now. I read this earlier, but even under, I don't know what section, but there's the section on climate action and monitoring. And there's something just like my brain was trying to think about, I don't know how to articulate this, but how to just like heighten the science within it as well, like the science that we're really going to need to help guide us through this process. So that was just something. I think a lot of the other stuff is really resonant, but those are the things that kind of came up for me.
Commissioner Nelson.
I thought that I didn't think the language was very strong in terms of noting that we are in a climate crisis now, and if this is to carry us forward, it is only going to get worse. And so I didn't feel like there was a sense of urgency in the text that was written, and I would certainly like to see much more of that. I also had, when I was reading the document, I think I was not clear as to, are you describing what we have now? Are you using the present tense because 10 years from now, this is where we'll be? It was confusing to me, because if it's describing what we have now, that is not true, in my opinion. In the racial and social equity guide decisions, I believe as soon as this is written, there will be yet another group that will be identified as being underserved. And I am not in any of those underserved communities. I recognize that. And I know it's probably good to have those communities specifically called out. But on the other hand, that shouldn't preclude whatever called out underserved community arises next year. And so I would prefer text that was broad but wasn't naming. But I know if you're not named, then often lawmakers interpret that as they don't have to necessarily serve you. So I don't know what the resolution is there, but I mean, if you just did a percentage of how many people in Portland fit into these different groups, That's a huge, I think that's a fairly large percentage of the population. You got old people, you got young people. And then some old people and some young people are not black, so then you have black people. Anyway, I'm just saying this is a huge swath of the population, and yet for legal purposes, it's probably good to name the specific group, but I just think a year from now, there is going to be another group that at the moment, maybe most of us are not thinking about, and yet we'll say, yeah, why didn't we? So I'll just throw that out. I would like more visionary leadership from this document than what I'm seeing. I know needs to be something that is acceptable to other existing city bureaus and city staff that are there today, but it's a planning document for the future. It's for 10 years out, it's for 20 years out. Conditions are gonna change, staff are gonna change. We can't be, I'll just leave it there. I would like to see more assertions of looking forwards. Portland used to be a city that other cities looked at for some of the remarkable things they're doing. I would say we are not in that situation anymore. I mean, we did remarkable things with the Fairless Square, the bus development. That was great. We did wonderful things for looking at how we manage stormwater. We are not leading in those things anymore. We are not leading in our urban forestry. I mean, we're doing okay, but we're not leading, and I don't see this as a document that is going to lead us in a direction that will prepare us for what is coming ahead. So, I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but those are my sentiments, so.
Okay, other commissioners, thoughts? Thank you. Commissioner Meisner.
Thank you. I just want to say that this reads really well. Like, I agree with everything it says. I would say my concern is that although it reads well and everything sounds good in it, my concern is that this doesn't match necessarily what urban forestry is actually doing in some of these cases. For example, like when we talk about goal number 3 of prioritize the needs of centered communities. Urban forestry has a pattern and a history of doing the exact opposite. Then when we talk about above and like the equity section, when it talks about taking accountability for our history, like I feel like a broken record at this point, because I feel like every couple of meetings this comes up, I bring up things that have been happening at urban forestry or that have happened at urban forestry, and there has not been any accountability. There it still hasn't really been, anything hasn't really been addressed. Like we haven't had a conversation with urban forestry or as a group to really address everything that's happened. And I'm not talking about just us as commissioners, but urban forestry itself has taken an active role in doing the opposite of some of these things that are in here. And again, like it sounds nice, but if the actions don't match what's being said, like it's just performative. And like that's really where my concerns are in this. And it's hard to trust that like after this plan is released that all these things are going to happen when there's been a pattern of these things not happening or a pattern of the opposite happening. So that's where those are my concerns with this.
Commissioner Plack.
Sorry, I know I've already spoken, so I don't mean to take someone's spot, but I think it's helpful maybe just listening to Commissioner Meisner and Commissioner Nelson to define what a vision statement is meant to do, in the sense that it's not meant to describe where we're at today, but it is meant to drive the future work. And so I think some of the concerns I'm hearing is that it's not matching what we're doing today, but a vision statement isn't necessarily supposed to be summarizing the current work. That said, I also agree that
we too often see vision statements where there isn't really the accountability of like what happens if we don't actually deliver on these goals. And so I do want to hold that up, that what Commissioner Meisner just said, that that is really important. And we know that historically these things haven't been done. They also haven't been part of the vision, right? That's part of the point. Like centered communities were not centered, and that's why we see the outcomes that we see. So I believe in, of course, like we want the vision statement to reflect what we want to see, but it is important that we think about what does accountability look like? How do we measure these things, right? Like, how do we say that we are truly serving the centered communities 10 years from now, 5 years from now? I hope it doesn't take 10 years because we don't have 10 years looking at the climate reality that we're in. So.
Others that we haven't heard from, this is obviously a real important area. Commissioner Clapp. Let's see, maybe I can see who else is on the screen. If you could scroll down, that'd be great. Yeah. Commissioner Judelman, Commissioner Lilly. We'd love to hear from you on this.
See if I can fix this.
Great. Didn't
Okay,
see who was up first.
Yeah,
I'll just do it in the
I-
order of the screen then. Commissioner Clapp?
All right, thank you. I do appreciate this as a good draft document for the vision and goals, and I appreciate what Commissioner Plack noted, that this is aspirational, but I also do agree. I am someone who really pays a lot of attention to how things are done and how they are implemented on the ground. I use the previous urban forestry plan, the carbon goals, and other things that the city of Portland has done, the sustainability plan, as a basis of my work when I worked with the city. I cited it multiple times as rationale for whatever decision we were making and however the code was being applied at that moment. So I really do think that having these goals is extremely important because they should inform how people on the ground make their decisions. So I think that it's important as an aspiration and or as aspirational and looking forward specifically. So I think I don't really have any intense comments on it. I know that everything here has been done over at least months, but probably closer to years worth of work and interaction with the community. So I know that a lot of times the city is seen as a top-down kind of actor, so that these aspirational goals are the city's aspirational goals, meaning the city of Portland kind of bureaucratic machine, as opposed to something that's ground up from the people, more of a grassroots idea. So I think that this reflects what the people are asking for, and I think now it's up to the city to implement it. So I don't have any specific comments. I think this does a really good job of covering it. But I do also hear what other commissioners have said about kind of saying, okay, this is really good. Let's make sure that we actually do this and put it to action. Excuse me. So I think that's about all I have. I know we're not doing any wordsmithing, and yeah, I guess I should finally note, I also agree with the commissioners who have noted that this should be a little bit more science forward. That way the vision and what we're trying to do could be backed up in practice, saying, this is visionary and we want to push the bar a little bit further. I think I agree with Bruce's statement on that it would be nice if we also could make this aspirational, but also kind of shoot for the stars and say, we're really going to apply for something. But I don't know if that's going to be too much for a vision. Perhaps closer to something that we're going to talk about with the goals section. So yeah, that's all I have. Thanks.
Commissioner Lilly.
Thank you. I like I read through these. They sound great to me. I like, I do admire that. I want them to be visionary, like as far as we can push the envelope, yes, I mean, I'm going to be an advocate for any kind of land back movement statements in there, in that not necessarily the transfer of ownership back to indigenous people as much as the stewardship principles of indigenous people who have tended and worked with the land since time immemorial. The spirit of the treaties that have been signed are, included in this, and that should be what we should strive for. So I'm going to be supportive of very aspirational statements like that. And then also, I think I like the last, that collaborative care and shared responsibility. Huge component of community engagement, and that community can inform where we want to go. To me, the details of the plan is going to be the most important part, and I want to make sure that what we heard from community, it's not just like we heard from them and then we put this plan together, but we're answering them, we're engaging with them, and that their input is they're co-creating this, as opposed to we're hearing their advice and then picking and choosing what we want throughout, and that should just be throughout our entire plan as best as possible, to really work with community and partnering on some of those elements. So I think the language could probably be maybe beefed up or expanded on a little bit more, maybe that section that I shared. But I think this is great. I would support it. But I think the details of how we execute this and sort of the strategies is where I probably would weigh in more. Thanks.
Very good, thanks. Anyone else we haven't heard from? I see that Commissioner Bechtold was having connectivity problems. Are you still not there?
I'm here, but I had to go off camera because it kept
Okay.
freezing.
Yeah, any thoughts or questions you want to share?
Nothing for me that hasn't been covered. Thank you. Very thoughtful comments.
And I see Commissioner Plack has a timeline been identified as far and how soon Urban Forestry wants to see the vision become reality? How long is this vision statement meant to last?
Good question. I'll respond to that question first and then can respond to some of the comments.
Yeah.
So in terms of a timeline, the plan, as per Title 11, is meant to be a 10-year plan. However, some things, we can't do everything in 10 years. So I think in terms of the vision statement, we're thinking both where we would like to be in 10 years, but it is aspirational. So maybe we won't get to everything by then, but it'll be up to the next update process to decide if it's the same vision or not. But certainly the strategies and actions that are supporting the vision and goals, the majority of those are going to be within that 10-year time frame. So under ideal conditions, if we can get funding for everything, we can achieve these things in 10 years, but we don't have control over all of that. And then, thank you, Commissioner Plack, for the reminder that the vision and goals are not intended to be reflective of where we are today. It's what we hope to be and do in the future. There'll be other sections of the plan to talk about where we're at today, but the vision and goals is really where do we want to go? How do we know when we've gotten there? And then our strategies and actions are all the detailed items of how we actually achieve them. So they will be much more specific. They'll have timelines, they'll have implementation partners, including city, also community groups. So that's where we'll see a lot of that detail. Thanks for all of the great comments. I think a lot of that aligns with other things we've been hearing, but it's, I think the emphasis on bringing more urgency, that we're in a climate crisis and conveying that more clearly, that isn't something we've heard in the other groups. So that's definitely something we can work in. And I'm glad that you all mentioned that. I think Bruce, to your comment, part of what we'll continue to do as we do more refinement and wordsmithing is thinking about that question. Because we as on the project team have also been thinking about wanting to be specific and mention specific underserved communities, but also knowing that, yeah, we can't predict what's gonna come up in the future. So how do we get that phrasing right? So really appreciate that comment, and that's certainly something that's top of mind for us. One follow-up question I have, just to make sure I'm understanding all of the comments correctly. A few comments about wanting to see more about this, the science incorporated in here. Just wanted to clarify, maybe Commissioner Vandermark, we can start with you. Do you mean the climate science or the science information we need about tree species? Just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly with what you want to see there.
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. I was more, I mean, science in general, like I really appreciated your comment right at the front. Like we also want to make it accessible language. So I really think that's important. Like a document is, if it's not accessible, it doesn't matter. So I appreciate that. I was leading more with climate because honestly, as we move forward, we can't really do tree science without simultaneously doing climate science, right? Like it's, they're going to become inseparable. So I was more focused on how the aspect of the client science is going to drive what we're doing with trees.
Thank you for clarifying. That makes sense.
Yeah, related to that, and I might have said this actually in the Parks Board too, is, putting growth of the canopy much more obvious. There's a lot more about protection than growing the canopy, and so that would fit in with the climate science. And then, echoing a couple things that I really love that Commissioner said. I love the idea of having the stewardship part be in there, of going back to indigenous roots, and then being, I think Bruce brought this up, being a model for other places, to say, if this can't be visionary or really aspirational to sort of be the best, then we'll never get there. So I like the concept of being the model for equity, being the model for, protecting against climate change, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and then around the science part, to maybe just look at, I love the accessible language, but in a sense, maybe some of the things the technical committee said gets a little lost. So just making sure that that is incorporated in there. Those are a few thoughts that I had. Commissioner Clapp?
Thank you. Yeah, that, in terms of my comment about having the science, I think it would be more of having a statement that is very clear that, we are in a climate emergency, that this is, it's more important than just having a lot of trees in our city that help with certain things. And there doesn't seem to be I don't know, maybe this isn't the right place, but in the healthy, biodiverse, and climate resilient urban forest, it doesn't say, it seems very soft in saying amidst ongoing unexpected climate challenges. And I think that's a reasonable way to put it, but I think that this is also the place to be a little bit more forward and outright saying we're in a climate emergency and things are getting worse. And this is to help reduce it getting really bad, or stymie it as best we can. But something that's just a little bit more stronger language about how important trees are to the entire urban forest, is to not only the climate resilience, but also the people that live in the city, and it being used as a tool to help keep people healthy, help keep the climate in our area healthy. So just something that'd be a little bit more stronger in terms of calling out the climate emergency, I think.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
And I'll also add that we are thinking about, because we do kind of getting to that piece of collaborative care and shared responsibility. We do want to craft these goals and our vision in a way that it's not just the city, that it is community organizations who have to play a role in this. So we're thinking about, how to convey that more clearly. And then also, as we develop our recommendations and actions, be working with community to also have some recommendations in there that other organizations want to sign up for to help us achieve, so that it is a little bit more of a collaborative effort than just the city. So we'll see what there is to do there. All right, so we can move on to the goals. I've got a couple comments on those already, but just to make space for that discussion as well. So our goals are grouped into these 3 different themes: equitable preservation, care, and expansion, education, outreach, and partnership, climate action and monitoring. So for equitable preservation, care, and expansion, protect, preserve, restore, and expand Portland's urban forests to improve ecological and community health. Equitably distribute tree canopies so all Portlanders can enjoy trees where they live, work, and play. Prioritize the needs of centered communities and urban forest planning, programming, and services. Centered communities is the term that Portland Parks and Recreation uses to refer to those populations that were mentioned in the racial and social equity piece in the vision. Provide Portlanders with resources, services, and programs to preserve, plant, and care for trees. Prioritize the preservation and planting of trees and creation of new spaces for trees and policies, plans, and projects to enhance the city's livability and resiliency. And for education, outreach, and partnership, provide programs and education about trees and tree care that are responsive to community identified needs, accessible to all Portlanders, and empower residents to be active stewards. Coordinate and support efforts across government departments, community organizations, and residents to expand and care for the urban forest through frequent communication and collaborative partnerships. Climate action and monitoring. Actively manage the urban forest and adapt practices to maintain forest health to respond to the changing climate and the challenges that go along with it. Monitor and assess urban forest health and distribution to understand past trends, anticipate future management needs, reduce service gaps. So I'll certainly carry forward some of the questions that were mentioned or comments from the vision discussion that apply to the goals. But if there's any other comments commissioners want to share about the goals specifically, kind of the same set of questions applies. Commissioner Nelson.
Is this an appropriate place to flat out call for city funding of street tree maintenance? I mean, it seems like it should be somewhere in this document. I would hope that is an aspiration that by the time we adopt the next urban forest management plan, that will be a reality. But if it's not even called out, this plan seems like a shortcoming.
Yeah, I think that fits well under some of the goals, and so it definitely will, street tree maintenance for
I
sure
mean,
will be
it's-
included as part of a recommendation.
You could certainly
strategy, but-
interpret it from a lot of the different goals that are listed, but I think it should just be called out. I would not want to leave it to the interpretation of a future city council member who would decide, that's not really called out in the urban forest management plan. It just says we need to collaboratively work, so I don't think we need to fund that. I mean,
yeah.
Heaven forbid if somebody was in city council, but I say it's quite possible.
Commissioner Lilly.
I had a different comment than that. But just to add comments about the goals. I oop, um I think the number two, the just the word Portlanders want to flag. A lot more people than Portlanders benefit from trees, at least from our tree canopy. I'm not sure how we want to expand that. We have guests. It's sort of um the same kind of line thinking around the word citizen, community member, like you have to be a citizen of Portland or a resident, or it kind of leads to that. There's a lot broader audience that benefit from this. And then I think the goals are very human. They're stated very human centric. When all the critters, bugs, and especially our one-legged tree relatives, they all benefit as well. And that's what the urban forestry plan should also strive to include. It's not just for our benefit as humans, but it's the benefit of all living things kind of together. So just those notes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, Commissioner Plack. And then Commissioner Clark.
Appreciate what Commissioner Lilly said. Thank you. Agreed. I also just don't see measurable goals here. Like they don't really define how we would know that we reached some of these goals. I wonder if that's going to be spelled out somewhere else. But I feel like our city's kind of suffering right now for a lack of measurable goals in our county on a lot of issues. And I think it's one of the things that's making it hard for us to really see the progress that we want to see, is we have to really be able to say, this is what it looks like, this is how we measure it. So I'm curious if that will show up somewhere, maybe not in these kind of shortened goals, but maybe somewhere else in the document, there might be more details on actual data that we're looking for.
I'll just respond to that quickly. Yeah, appreciate that comment. And certainly measurable goals and accountability is an important part of this plan. So we'll have an entire section on sort of our reporting protocol. What are the measures? How are we going to measure these goals? How often are we going to measure them? What data do we need to measure them? All of that comment.
Commissioner Clapp.
That was my main comment as well. That classically none of these goals are SMART goals, as it were, and I think that would be really helpful. And so I know that these are drafts and also kind of larger things, but I think that I would prefer to see some more measurable things. And I am not sure if this is kind of a response to the city's black eye with the reduction in canopy from our goal of 30-some%. And then we significantly did not reach that goal, in fact, went backwards. So now we don't see that goal here at all. So it's almost as if it's a means of us making goals, but not quite making it so that it's so clear and obvious if we don't succeed in reaching those. And I think we should face that. And I really think it would be important here in these specific small goals to say, we want to protect, preserve, restore, expand Portland's urban forest to this level by this time. Something that is at least a little bit more concrete, so that we can actually move off of this, like rather than just having a nice idea, but where we can go and then figure out how we're going to measure that later. I think it would be good to put it right here so that it's very clear what we're working towards. So if anyone is looking around, nothing is ambiguous, or rather we have as few ambiguities as possible.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, I do want to start by saying, Belinda, you take feedback so thoughtfully. So I just want to always highlight that. It's always hard to be on the receiving end, and you do it so well. But one thing I'm remembering, and Commissioner Lilly, thank you for your comment. I thought I'd love to see within the goals more of some of the language we had from the earlier section that does speak to the diversity of folks that make up our community, and I don't just mean the human creatures, but the other creatures as well. It's kind of like we talk about biodiversity above, but then we don't bring it in the same way, and we're trying to preserve it for all of us. So I just want to say, like, bring some of that in here. And similarly, in the above section, we also talk about how our urban forest, right, is not just the trees, but, you know, the shrub layer. And so I don't know if we could just bring some of that into, you know, kind of like the first goal section, like number 4, where it says provide Portlanders with resources, et cetera, you know, to plant and care for trees. Like we might be able to like bring in, you know, the rest of the, you know, the urban forest canopy layers or something. So I think that, and again, I know we've said this, but like just any way to like almost on some of the comments, like almost make the goals feel a little more proactive or visionary if possible, right? Like, and like actively managing is great, like as a way to describe it, but I'm just trying to think, how do we infuse it with the vision, right? Because like we want to be leaders around all of these things. I think we all care in it. So just let's be visionary.
Thank you. Commissioner Clapp, to respond to your comment, that's a good segue for the next part of the presentation, which is about our canopy targets, which are kind of those more specific goals about how much canopy we want to see. So those will also be very clearly highlighted in the plan, but we did keep them separate from the other goals, which speak more to how we would achieve that canopy goal.
Let me move on to just one quick comment. So it does relate to this maybe not carrying through into the goals, some of the things in the vision. So one thing that stuck out for me was the safety concerns. And so, you know, working collaboratively with other bureaus and so forth to have a comprehensive and transparent safety plan. You know, I think it sort of relates to the comments we heard earlier from the public comments and that type of thing. So I'm not sure, you'd have to wordsmith that, but I think it's gonna be, even though rare, it's gonna be an increasing concern and so, yeah, anyway.
Any other comments about the goals? Fine. Thank you. I really, really appreciate the feedback. This really highlights the importance to me of why it's important to have so many different advisory committees to make sure we're hearing a lot of well-rounded feedback and hearing some things from this group that I haven't heard from others.
Quick comment on the chat. Oh, whoops. 60 Portland residents who died in the heat dome. Yeah, low canopy neighborhoods. Yeah, don't want it to get lost. Yeah.
Great. So for the remainder of the presentation and discussion, we'll talk about canopy targets. So I'll go over what are canopy targets, share what we learned from our literature review and peer study review, go over what some of the city's current targets are, and then talk about our proposed approach for what we'll do, thinking about doing for this new plan, and then have a discussion. So first, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're talking about when we say canopy target, or it can be considered just a canopy goal. We're talking about the area of the city that we want to be covered by canopy. So in this example, this is from Washington, DC, I think. Their current canopy coverage is 37%. So 37% of DC's area is covered by canopy. That's talking about the above ground parts of trees. And then thinking about where they want to be. So their potential tree canopy, so how much tree canopy could they have, is 55%. So we'll be wanting to set through this process, what is our percentage goal? What do we want to achieve? What's missing here is by what time frame. So is it 55% by 2035? Is it 2050? cetera. So our goal will have a percentage, it'll have a time frame, and we're also thinking about how do we want to measure that goal? Is it citywide or is it by neighborhood, or some other measure or combination? So to think about what we want for our canopy targets in the upcoming urban forest plan, we looked to see what guidance there was in the literature and what other cities are doing. So looking through the literature, I'm not going to go through all of this, but essentially, there's not a lot of guidance about how you should measure it, your canopy goal, in terms of citywide, neighborhood, land use. But there is some guidance about how cities should be thinking about what that percentage canopy cover should be. So we used to see something like cities should analyze their potential, how much space is there for trees given the needs for other types of infrastructure, and then take 75% of that potential, and that's what your goal would be. Then later on, there is a desire, sort of an understanding of the need for a more community-specific approach. So thinking about, okay, we should have a different goal for cities that are in different climates and may have different potential. So in 2018, we see this guidance for 60% canopy for cities that are in forested states like Oregon. We also found some research about what canopy cover is needed to really see a reduction in urban heat. So there was one study that identified that 40% canopy at either the block or neighborhood level is needed to see significant changes. And then there's also a Dutch idea of this 330-300 rule, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's this idea that everyone from their home should be able to see 3 trees. Their neighborhood should have at least 30% canopy cover. And they should live 300 meters, which is a little less than a quarter mile, from a forested park or green space. Other than that, the guidance is kind of, to be logical, to think about your geography. What's your space? What's your climate? What are your financial constraints? What are local political challenges that cities should consider as they set their canopy targets? So in terms of our peer city review, we chose to select cities based on population, land area, population density, so how many people per square mile, climate. So wanting to find cities that were like Portland in many ways. And then also wanting to find cities that were set their canopy targets in the last 10 years or so as a way of sort of filtering out cities that maybe set their goals a long time ago when we had less science about tree canopy and climate impacts. So just sort of as a way to look at cities who are using the latest best practices. And then also wanted to try to find cities that are using a variety of methods. So not just the citywide goal, which is the most common, but what are some other approaches cities are using? So this is the list of cities that we reviewed. There's 13 others aside from Portland. So we have some cities from the Pacific Northwest, but also wanted to look beyond across the country, and then also look to international examples as well. There's a lot out there when you're looking worldwide, but not a lot of information in plan documents, and we're mostly limited in terms of the international searches to Google searching, seeing what we could find, what was in English. So that's kind of how we landed on the Toronto, Oslo, and Auckland. So what did we learn from our peer cities? So the most common citywide canopy target, so how much canopy cities want their cities to be covered by canopy, is 40%. But the range is from 30% to 60%. So mostly cities in their urban forest plans are looking at an increase of 10%. But again, there's a range of 0 to 20. So some are a little more ambitious with that 20%. in terms of the time frame that cities are giving themselves to reach that goal, average was 20 years, but some are as little as 10 and some are as high as 40 years. So then we also looked at cities that are using the variety of methods of measuring their goals, or what many cities call management units. So that's something below the citywide scale. It's those neighborhoods or a voting precinct, land use, neighborhood business districts, watersheds, or census block groups. So 75% of the cities that we looked at had a management unit goal. So they were going beyond just that citywide goal. And mostly the reason for that was to ensure equitable canopy distribution. So I think cities like Portland are increasingly realizing that if we just look at the citywide approach, that doesn't get us to where we want to be for serving everyone. And of the approaches we looked at, using the neighborhood level was the most common management unit. We also found that several cities have similar or higher population densities than Portland and have more canopy today. So these are examples of cities where we can have more people, more housing, and the infrastructure that goes along with supporting that, and also have more canopy coverage. And some of these cities, as you'll notice, have even higher, like much higher population densities than Portland, and are still able to have much higher canopy. Similarly, we found that several cities have higher or similar population densities and have higher targets. So people are also aiming higher than what we have currently in Portland with our 30%, 33% citywide canopy goal. So there's certainly precedent in other parts of the community to be more aspirational, be more visionary, and do more to address our climate crisis. And plenty of other cities to learn from and how we could do that. So now I want to share just what we're where we're at now. So what are the city's current canopy targets? So we have our urban forest management plan from 2004, which has canopy targets set in these different, what it calls urban land environments. So sort of like land use. So we have transportation right of way, developed parks and open space, commercial, industrial, and institutional areas, and residential areas, each with their own specific goal. And then later in 2012, and then again in 2015 with our climate action plan, we have other goals that are more, that take a different approach than the 2004 plan. So the Portland plan first is where we see the 1/3 of the city covered by canopy by 2035, and also a call for a residential neighborhood minimum of 25%. And that the climate action plan just builds on the Portland plan, but also calls out specific goal for central city, commercial, and industrial areas. Commissioner Clapp, I see your hand, so I'm happy to take that question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if you could go back to just one slide. Cool. Thank you. I just wanted to note, just as maybe more of a point of just noting, Boston and Brookline and Pittsburgh are all cities that have their urban forestry department manages all of their street trees. And so as a note with this slide specifically, where they have higher goals, similar densities, and are shooting higher, being aspirational, I think that is something that should be noted. I would be fairly positive Washington, D.C. Does too, and I know they have Casey Trees. They're really intense, very active nonprofit. But I know at least those three large cities are essentially doing it themselves rather than what we're working on. And I know we're working towards it, but I just wanted to make that point because that should add to this management plan. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, quick question on that, because I had the same thought or question, is there any other, so those three that have the highest current canopy, is that the only difference, or, you know, what are the other sort of areas where they've excelled? Do we know that?
No, so that's something we're working on now, is to contact those cities to see, what are the other things they're doing, like street tree maintenance, and are there other, other programs or ways of managing that they're doing and seeing successes.
They get summer rain also. Pittsburgh,
Interesting.
Boston, Brookline, they get summer rain.
Yeah.
More so than we do.
Right.
They also have much more storm activity and snow
Yeah.
winter.
From Megan Vandermark, how is the canopy density distributed? You mean in those cities? Is that your
Like,
thought?
are you asking, is it equitably distributed in those cities also?
Sorry, well, I'd be curious about that as well.
We
but I'm
can't hear
curious-
you. Not sure why.
Oh, it's because I have my little whatever up. I'm curious just within those, like I actually know DC very well. I used to live there, but like how is it across the types of areas from street trees to parks to industrial? Like, is there a comparison of where the trees are, not just what the density is? You know, like, because you know, Belinda, you were talking about, right, like looking at the minutia of the density across these different types of areas. So I'm curious if there's an analysis of where, right, like Washington, D.C. as an example has Rock Creek Park, right? They have, you know, like I'm assuming that's bringing it up kind of like our Forest Park, but do we know how it's distributed? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
great question. No, I don't know yet, but that's definitely something that we can look into as well. I appreciate that.
So just want to comment, we have 7 minutes left, so I want to make sure you get through and get what you need.
Yeah.
In terms of,
So this just wanted to highlight that as we think about our canopy targets, just like everything else with this plan, we are referring back to what did we hear from the broader community about where they want trees. Also had some support for the statement, neighborhoods across Portland have similar access to trees. We talked about some statements like that in our survey and in our focus groups, and across the board, there was interest in that. And then alluding to what we discussed already, but just that there were some mixed opinions from different interest groups about having canopy and the way we care for canopy on highways and major streets and industrial areas. So just to summarize our approach moving forward and what we've been doing to set our canopy targets, we did our literature review and peer city practices review, which, we started, but we're still trying to have conversations with those cities to dive deeper into what's going on there and what's working well for them. And then we came up with a preliminary approach for what we could do here, which I'll share with you in a moment. Very preliminary, it's just a conversation starter at this point. Then we will work with our advisory committees and have city staff discussions to refine our approach. And by approach, I mean are we doing just the citywide goal or smaller management unit goals? And then once we have confirmation on that, then we'll think about what is our target, what's our percentage, and what's our timeline to get there. So before I share the approach, just want to share that we're trying to set some guidelines for ourselves with what we're trying to achieve with our canopy targets. So we want to use boundaries that are unlikely to change over time and are contained within Portland. It's very important that we're able to measure our progress towards achieving the targets. So we want to make sure we're using boundaries and data that will allow us to do that. We also want to communicate some kind of basic level of service in priority areas. What we mean by that is in areas that people have identified where they want to see trees. So where people live, work, and play, commercial areas, want to communicate what is that sort of minimum or basic service we want to provide. We also want to select an approach that's easy to explain to the public. Working with canopy data, there's zoning, you can get very complicated very fast, but we want this to be something that people can understand, and people can ask questions about what we're doing to move there. Building off of what we heard, we want to be able to have goals that will help us increase canopy where people live, work, and gather or play. We want canopy targets that can help us achieve city goals like equitable canopy distribution, climate action, creating inviting public spaces, encouraging walking, biking, and transit riding. We want to select targets that are achievable, but also want to be aspirational. And also define targets, trying to take as much as we can a science-driven approach using our current canopy coverage. So where are we at now? What is our potential? And talking with staff who have expertise about, what's our capacity to actually plant trees? How many trees are we preserving with our programs? Just making sure that we're being realistic. And then of course, also talking with community and incorporating that feedback. Last, just making sure that as we set our targets, we're incorporating needs for canopy, shade equity, climate resilience, housing, employment, recreation, natural area management practices. So this is where we're thinking of at this point. And again, I'm just sharing this as a conversation starter to hear whether you think we're on the right track. So the idea of having a citywide goal, a neighborhood minimum, then have a goal for transportation rights of way, and then land use. So parks and open space, commercial areas, and industrial areas. So it's sort of bridging together where we've been, but trying to make it in a sort of somewhat cohesive way and also reflecting what we've learned from other cities' best practices. So we have very little time, but I would love to hear initial thoughts.
Commissioner Nelson.
Could you forward or send to Brian to send to us your presentation? One thing. Second is canopy is a two-dimensional measurement. So 3 flowering cherry trees that shade the same amount of ground space as 150-foot Doug fir would count the same. Is that correct? The way we're measuring canopy. And I would suggest the quality of the canopy from that 100-foot tall tree far exceeds the canopy that we get from the cherries. But so it's unfortunate that the tool we're using is 2-dimensional as opposed to 3, but that might be all we've got.
I'm gonna make a suggestion. This seems really important, the whole measurement thing and knowing more about these model cities and so forth. And so I don't know if there's a possibility to have you come again for, I don't know about time frame, to talk about this whole aspect. Cause like I would wanna know, okay, what is gonna be, there's probably some way to sort of measure likelihood of success, based upon, opportunity, ease, in terms of whether we should be thinking, for example, more about industrial areas or this type of thing. So, yeah, because I know we're out of time. So,
Yeah, I'm happy to come back.
yeah, cool. Others good with that? Good. Well, this has been really great. Really appreciate it. It's just a fabulous piece of work. Yeah, and I just want to thank all the commissioners for being so engaged and having such great questions and helping us do more of a round robin in our discussions. And so unless there's something burning, we could call it. Okay, thanks everyone, and to be continued. There's a lot of energy here.
Thank you so much,
Thank you all so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.